Two teams will enter, and only one can leave national champions. The Indiana Hoosiers look to cap off a perfect season, and the Miami Hurricanes look to climb back to the peak of the college football world.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It's safe to say this is the biggest football crossover episode that either of us have done. As we're headed to the national championship game, you are watching and listening on Locked On Canes and Locked On Hoosiers. He is Jacob Goins from Locked On Hoosiers. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Hoosiers and Locked On Canes your first listen. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the #1 Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The college football playoff is here, and FanDuel is the best place to get in on the action all playoff long. So visit FanDuel.com to get your college football playoff profit boosts every game day. We'll have our predictions. We'll have our key players and matchups. We'll talk injury updates. And I think most importantly, Jacob, let's talk storylines. And I will give you the floor first, because if I had told someone, 2 years ago that the Indiana Hoosiers, coming off a 3-9 football season in 2023, would be playing for and favored to win a national championship here in January of 2026, I would have gotten some strange looks. So how did the Hoosiers get here?
Yeah, boy, it's great to talk to you and great to preview what I think is going to be a fun national championship game on Monday night. And it's the story that pretty much everybody has heard at this point. It's one of my favorite factoids that, the bigwigs have started to run with, is the idea that Indiana had more losses in FBS than any team in college football. And here they are 2 years later. They hire this old guy from James Madison. He wears glasses. He doesn't smile. He comes in and starts making some pretty heavy demands, and Indiana says, all right, we'll see what happens. And now 2 years later, you're in the college football playoff national championship game. I mean, it is if the Hoosiers cap it off tonight, and even if they don't, Alex, I think this is the biggest and greatest turnaround we've seen in the history of college sports, not just football, but just in college sports in general. I mean, I understand that in today's world, right, with NIL and transfer portal, it's easy to get better quickly, but you're not supposed to be able to do it to this extreme for the Indiana Hoosiers. And so I also love the storyline just for both of our squads, that this is the national championship that very few people predicted. This matchup in particular, Indiana and Miami, because of the teams and the history and the logo bias, and then the paths that these two teams took to get here, right? Nobody picked, myself included, nobody picked Miami to get through a road game at Texas A&M, a game against Ohio State, and then against the offensive firepower of Ole Miss. Indiana, kind of the same way. They were favored in all of their games, but people wanted to pick Indiana to fall against Alabama. People said they would lose in a rematch against Oregon or couldn't keep up with Texas Tech, and here we are. So for Indiana in particular, it's the storyline we all know, the greatest turnaround in the history of college sports. But I think this game in itself, including the Hurricanes, it's a matchup that most people didn't predict, and I think that's what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, Jacob, when Miami first snuck into the playoff, they get the final at-large bid, and obviously everyone in South Florida is thrilled to be there. And I'm not going to say that Miami fans didn't think they could go in and raise hell in the playoff. And I know Nick Saban even said that before Miami got in. If they can find their way into the playoff, this is going to be a super dangerous team. But then at the same time, to your point, when I actually looked at the bracket and I saw you got to go to College Station for the first game. And then you're going to have to, if you get through that first game, you're going to have to beat the defending champs, Ohio State. And then you're going to have to face, we suspected it would be Georgia, but the winner of Georgia versus Ole Miss, it ended up being, an Ole Miss team that went 11-1, was 13-1 at that point. I looked at that and I said, that's such a gauntlet that if Miami can get to the championship game or win the championship game, it would be the most battle-tested Miami Hurricanes team of all time. And there have been 5 teams throughout history at Miami that have won national titles. I don't think any would be more impressive than if this Miami team can clear this final hurdle. And, I think to me, if I look at the storylines on the Miami side, I mentioned at the top, obviously Miami's been at the top of the mountain before, but people, get tired when old heads like me talk about the teams of the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, right? Like everyone's been asking, is the U back? And, it took not only to go out and get, a passionate alumnus like Mario Cristobal to come coach the team, but it also took investment and alignment from the administration, because they had really let athletics fall behind for a long time. And obviously Miami's gotten a lot more aggressive now in football and in basketball. They had a Final Four run a couple of years ago. So it really took a lot of drastic changes to get to this point. It took, tremendous recruiting classes to get here, stacking top 10 classes, obviously some big and strategic moves in the transfer portal. Miami had Cam Ward at quarterback last year, but the defense stunk, so they couldn't get a hump. Miami goes and gets Corey Heatherman from Minnesota as the new defensive coordinator. He helped turn the defense around, and Carson Beck in much different ways than Cam Ward, but he's been poised enough and he's made enough plays to get Miami to this point. And, the journeys like this season, Jacob, have obviously been different. For Indiana, it's been, a couple of close calls, but no losses. It's been perfection up to this point. I look at it from a Miami point of view, and actually Miami had 2 losses this year, especially the second of those against SMU, I think was a blessing in disguise. That had Miami beat SMU, they would have had an easier road into the playoff. But I think that loss to SMU was a huge wake-up call for Carson Beck. It was a big wake-up call for offensive coordinator Shannon Dawson, who started to mix things up a lot more after that. And, I think for Miami, it kind of took that turning point to get here, and they've been playing their best football, not only these 3 games in the playoffs, but the 4 final regular season games, which were must win just to get here. And I got to ask you, though, Jacob, about another big storyline, and that is, a young man who grew up in South Florida, who's with the Hoosiers and just won a Heisman Trophy, Fernando Mendoza. I mean, what? And listen, I'm so happy for the run that he's been on. And I know, down here in Miami, the community has really embraced him. I don't know if everybody's going to be rooting for him tonight. really embraced him. I mean, what an amazing blessing he's been for the Hoosiers this year.
Yeah, he's incredible. I mean, just a remarkable story. And every time that he gets in front of a microphone or gets on camera, the whole world is reminded just how genuine he is and how excited he is to be playing college football and how he seizes every single moment. I mean, this was a guy playing football at Cal. People don't look at Cal football, the Golden Bears, and say, yeah, they're hiding a Heisman Trophy out there. No, they weren't. But he came to Indiana in a system that has proven to develop quarterbacks. Curtis Rourke was that way, coming from Ohio and into Indiana. He got drafted to the 49ers. And Fernando Mendoza is the exact same way. And that's talk about another storyline, the fact that Fernando's dad and Mario Cristobal played together at Miami. I mean, think about how crazy that is. Fernando said he grew up a mile from the campus of the University of Miami. That's so wild to think about. And here we are right back where everything got started. So Mendoza's been unbelievable. He's incredible. He's NFL ready right now. And that's why he's going to be the #1 pick in the NFL draft coming up in just a couple of months. And he was what Indiana needed. They got better at every position, Alex, from a year ago to this year, especially in the trenches. That's where they got exposed last year against Ohio State in the regular season and against Notre Dame in the college football playoff. So they got better at those positions, and then they elevated quarterback play even more. And that's why you see this team undefeated. Couple of close calls, sure, but that's what's so awesome about Fernando. And I know we're going to talk about matchups and things in just a moment, but he doesn't make many mistakes. And when he does, he makes up for it. I've never seen a quarterback do what he does to respond to his own mistakes. And hopefully he can do that again tonight in the Natty.
We're going to break down those matchups when we come back. And this is the biggest oversimplification of all time, so we will clarify. But will it be Miami's brawn versus Indiana's execution? You want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this Locked On Hoosiers, Locked On Canes crossover. And we're only getting started with FanDuel. Folks, the college football playoffs have been a wild ride, and we've got one final massive game here. And FanDuel is giving all customers even more ways to get in on the action tonight in the CFP. Because right now, every college football playoff game day, especially tonight, FanDuel users get a profit boost waiting for them in the app. And here's what I love about it. You get to use the profit boost on the bets you already feel good about. If you're riding with Indiana as the favorite, they've been the machine to this point. You think they're going to control the matchup, or if you want to take a shot on Miami as the underdog, or if you want to build a parlay around the players and moments that you think are going to decide this game, then you apply the profit boost and you go after even bigger winnings. And when you win, FanDuel pays out instantly, which is perfect for playoff football. FanDuel is the best place to get into the action all playoff long, so visit FanDuel.com to get your college football playoff profit boosts on every game day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes and Locked On Hoosiers your first listen here on this crossover. Guys, make sure you check out the Everydayer clubs. You can become an Everydayer for all the awesome shows on this network that you love, including Locked On Hoosiers and Locked On Canes. You get exclusive ad-free versions of the episodes. You get a 15% discount on the incredible merch store. I mean, people have been asking me for years, where's the Locked On merch? We got the merch now, and the Everydayers get the discount. You get exclusive newsletters, Discord access, one-on-one texting access, and so much more. To find your favorite shows, go to lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer and check out the link in the show notes as well. Oh, man. So, Jacob, I know Indiana could very well be the team that could have the answers, and they're going to try to find the answers. But in terms of Miami, like the first matchups that stick out to me are, can Miami continue to control and surprise in the trenches that they've done throughout the season? And, I know this is like old hat for Miami fans because they've heard it before. Ohio State thought they can handle Miami's defensive line, Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor. I mean, Texas A&M had players that were saying it. They're starting right tackle. I'm not worried about Ruben Bain. He's not going to be a threat. It happened with Notre Dame. Bain and Mesidor especially have been game wreckers throughout the year on the defensive line. Miami has faced Fernando Mendoza before, a very different situation when he was at Cal last year. But, maybe they have a leg up on some of his tendencies. We will find out. And then on the offense, Miami's going to try to want to control the clock and control time of possession the way that they did against Ole Miss. Now, it got dicey against Ole Miss because Miami had a lot of self-inflicted wounds, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But Miami had the football for 41 minutes and 22 seconds in that game. Mark Fletcher Jr. has just picked up his production to an incredibly high level in the playoffs. He's played the best ball of his career the past few games, and understanding the matchup that Indiana's rushing defense only gives up 75 yards per game, which is unreal. Miami is going to try to change that trend. But to me, from a Miami point of view, Jacob, I would be disingenuous if I started anywhere other than the line of scrimmage. That's where Miami's going to try to control and win this football game. What about IU?
As they should, right? I mean, that's Miami. When you think of this Miami team, and even the Miami teams of old, it's nasty defensive line. Just guys that get after the football, bully their way through, and just make it, miserable for an opposing offense. And look, Indiana's offensive line has gotten better as the year has gone on, which is what teams are supposed to do. But this offensive line is playing together. They're all moving as one. They know what's going on. And that sounds so elementary. And you're like, well, I would hope so in the national championship game, but there were struggles early, but they have gotten better. And playing in the Big Ten, man, you're going up against some of the best defensive lines in the nation, right? You're going up against Penn State and Ohio State, and you've had to play Oregon twice, and you've handled all of those teams. Mendoza doesn't get sacked very often, and this offensive line is playing its best football right now. But I think you're going up against the best defensive line you've seen all season. And so how do you overcome that? How do you get away from that? And maybe that's what Indiana tries to do, whether it's quick screens and quick slants, quick throws for Fernando Mendoza. If you try to run between the tackles, if you're trying to get to the outside, you have to find a way to get away from some of those guys because Miami is just too talented. But I'm confident in the offensive line for the Hoosiers to at least hold their own. I'm not going to say they're just going to manhandle them and put Miami on its back, but I do think that they handle themselves well. Indiana is committed to the run with two separate guys that they love to run the football with, Roman Hemby and Kalon Black. They'll also throw to those guys out of the backfield too, so keep an eye on that as well. Maybe something to take the stress off of Fernando Mendoza a little bit. And so really excited for that. But I'll use the same the same point here, Alex. It's Indiana's defensive line going up against the Miami O-line, because it's simple. When Indiana gets after the quarterback, they win football games. When they sack a guy 3, 4, 5 times and make it miserable for them and start to question their offense and call different plays that they're uncomfortable with, that's where Indiana gets aggressive. And you pair that with the secondary that's got several pick sixes on the year. They're aggressive on the football. The safeties love to cheat up and make big plays with guys like Amari Farrell. So that's where Indiana's defense is just so nasty. You'll move the football every now and then, and they'll have a bust in coverage here and there too. But just like I talked about with Fernando Mendoza, the defense does the same thing. They give up a big play, they make a big play. That's how they act. That's how they respond. And they're winning games because of it. So I look at that. I look at the run game again. Who can run the ball more? Who stays committed to the run more? Even if you're only getting 2 or 3 yards a carry, you've got to take the pressure off your quarterback in this type of a game, whether it's Carson Beck or Fernando Mendoza. And then I heard somebody say this the other day, and I think this is fascinating. In a national championship game like this, it's typically not the big name players that you think of, a guy like Malachi Toney or a guy like Elijah Surratt. It's typically somebody else that comes up and makes a big play, and whether that's offensively or defensively. So I think both of these teams have the talent outside of the number ones to do that. That's what I'm looking for here. What receiver steps up? What safety or corner steps up? Maybe a linebacker we don't talk about a whole bunch. What is that guy that steps up? And maybe you have an idea or two about who that could be for Miami.
Yeah, so a name that I keep thinking about for Miami, and he's the guy people don't often talk about him because we all talk about Mark Fletcher Jr., who's Miami's leading rusher, and Fletcher, he even joked he's ready for 50 carries on Monday if that's what it takes. But I'm looking at his understudy, the next man up, Marty Brown, is someone who could be, to your point, oftentimes it's not the lead actors who end up, being the guys who stamp it in the national championship game. Marty Brown, he's the second man up at running back, but he is someone who is, in a way, kind of familiar with this moment, at least at a different level. So Marty Brown was at North Dakota State last year, who won the FCS national championship, and he scored the game-winning touchdown in that game. And so, you have to wonder, he brings it up a level to the FBS national championship game. And oftentimes, Fletcher will kind of line him up and Brown will knock him down. Like Fletcher set up Marty Brown's game-winning touchdown against Texas A&M in the opening round of the playoffs. So I think Marty Brown is someone who can be like a low-key offensive playmaker in this game. I'll say the same thing about receiver CJ Daniels, and I'll say it because Malachi Toney gets so much attention from opposing defensive coordinators. I know Indiana is going to have a tremendous plan to slow down and bracket Toney as many ways as they possibly can. And then, Keelan Marion, another one of Miami's starting receivers, has had a really good playoff, whereas CJ Daniels, like we haven't seen like him break out as much in the postseason. And if he's the guy who gets the least attention, I could see CJ, who he wins a lot of 50-50 balls, great hands. He gets open probably more than Carson Beck gets into him in some cases. I could see CJ stepping up and making some big plays. And then, the name that I keep thinking about defensively, because we don't talk about Miami's linebackers as much because so much attention goes to the defensive line. Starting linebacker Wesley Besaint, who, famously put a controversial hit on Fernando Mendoza against Cal last year that a lot of people thought should have been targeting, was not ruled targeting. It seems like Besaint is motivated to put some pressure on that same quarterback again in this one. What about for Indiana?
Well, and that's the thing that I go back to is these two defenses and their defensive coordinators, they're too good, right? They're too good at game planning and scheming, and their guys are too good at executing to allow a guy like Toney or a guy like Surratt to go off for 150 through the air, or for, just to allow their guys to run all over a defense. Like, they're too good for that. But then you have some of these other guys that step up. And the guy I've talked about all year, he won't go for 100 yards. He won't have 7 catches or 8 catches or 9. But it's Indiana's tight end, Riley Nowakowski, a guy that I have talked about all season long. He is so effective in terms of his blocking, whether it's run blocking, maybe a chip block, pull out for a tight end screen. Indiana has scored on that several times this year. Haven't done it recently. I look for them to do it again in the national championship game. He's just your true tight end. He's not not pretty. He's not going to beat the big flashy one-handed grab over the middle, but he gets his job done. When Indiana needs somebody, they can dump it off to him. They pull everybody out, and he's got blockers in front and can make a big play. So offensively, I look for him. I think Omar Cooper obviously is a big name for Indiana. He's your wide receiver too. Charlie Becker has really come on as of late too.
He's been great.
Yeah, he's unbelievable. He really is. He's awesome, and looking forward to seeing him play in this game. So I look for Riley Nowakowski, the tight end, and then in the secondary for Indiana, D'Angelo Pons is the one that gets all the fame because he's the All-American, has a chance to go pro. He could come back. We're hoping for that, but he's the one that everybody talks about. I mentioned Amari Farrell as well, but I like a guy like Lewis Moore. That's somebody who, Alex, funny story there. He was applying for an extra year of eligibility this season to play for Indiana. He was going through the courts. His lawyers were involved. He was playing football this year, the first 3 or 4 games for the Hoosiers, and court dates were going on, and these hearings were happening with his eligibility up in the air. And he played his 4th game. I think he finally got it cleared. There was a chance he could have played the first 4 and then been told, nope, you're not eligible, because they basically took the mindset of, well, if you're not telling me I'm ineligible, I'm playing like I'm eligible. It got cleared up, and it's been phenomenal for Indiana secondary. So look for him to possibly make a big play tonight as well for the Indiana defense.
That's a cool story. Before we get on to predictions, any game time decisions, any injury situations to monitor for the Hoosiers?
Thankfully, not really. Everybody that's out, there's some big names, but they've been out for several weeks, and Indiana hasn't been relying on them. They've been out, and it's been a known factor. Stephen Daly's one of those, Marion Knight and guys like that. So the guys that are out, they've been out. So Indiana, not in a real bad situation. Brendan Franke is the Hoosiers' long field goal kicker, pretty much anything 50 yards and out. He is now questionable. He's been out for several weeks, but other than that, you're in a really good spot for Indiana, which is very, you're blessed to be in that spot at this point in the season. For Miami, anything we need to know about?
Yeah, cornerback Damari Brown, who it seems like it's been day-to-day game time decision situation for him. I'm not counting on him being available because he's been unavailable for the entirety of the playoffs. And so I don't know. It's just, it makes me a little pessimistic. Miami could really use him, especially in the first half, because one of their starting corners, Xavier Lucas,
that's right,
he's suspended for the first half due to targeting. So thankfully, his counterpart, the other starter, OJ Frederic, who's been banged up, he's going to start. He's going to play. So, with Lucas out for a half, I think Miami's going to see a lot of Ethan O'Connor, who's graded out really well in the playoffs, and then possibly some Jabari Antoine, who's a true freshman who's played well when called upon. But I would imagine that's going to be the guy Indiana's going to try to pick on when he's on the field, whenever Jabari Antoine is on the field. Miami's going to be without one of their top 2 tight ends, Elijah Lofton. He got hit really hard, I think, in the rib area against Ole Miss. He's not going to go. Other than that and Damari Brown, it seems like everybody else is good to go. Akeem Mesidor is going to play with a brace on his elbow. He got a little banged up in the Ole Miss game. Ahmad Moten Sr., a starting defensive tackle, he's good to go. So for the most part, Miami's gotten good news with a couple of exceptions, and I guess we'll find out about Damari Brown at the last minute. But when we come back, we're going to get down to those predictions. Will it be the Hoosiers or will it be the Hurricanes in the national title game? You want to keep it locked right here on this epic crossover event. Tax season, my friends. It is back, and it doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day, which I love. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out your forms, we've all been there, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online, and they handle everything from W-2s to self-employment forms and work to get you every deduction possible, guys. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver, and it gives real peace of mind knowing that an expert is handling it. So for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Thank you for making us your first listen. And for your next listen, check out our other shows. If you're a Locked On Canes everydayer, I think it's really important before kickoff to go see all that's going on with Indiana. Check out Jacob Goins on Locked On Hoosiers. If you're Locked On Hoosiers everydayer, check me out on Locked On Canes. Our shows are available free wherever you get your podcasts, free on YouTube here on America's #1 sports podcast network, the Locked On Network. All right, Jacob, I'll let you roll first with your prediction. If you want to throw in a couple of keys as well, like what Indiana has to do to reach your predicted scoreline, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, there's not going to be a secret on who we pick to win the game, but this segment more about why we think our teams will win the game and the scores that we have. And look, I'm super excited for this game. And I've told so many people, right, as fun as it has been for Indiana to just spank Alabama in the Rose Bowl and handle Oregon the way they did in the semifinal, I do think this is a closer game, and I somewhat want it to be a closer game. If we're celebrating to start the fourth quarter because Indiana's up by 40, that's a whole separate thing, but I do not think that is the case by any means. I think, and funny enough, I predicted this for the Indiana-Oregon game, and it didn't work out. So I'm going to go back to it and double down and see if it works. I think it's a defensive slugfest early. I think these two teams may even play a little tight just because of the game that it is, playing in the national championship game. And I think the defenses will come out on fire and getting after the quarterbacks, whether it's actually sacking them or causing incompletions and 3 and outs, some longer, some slower drives, some shorter drives. I think that's what happens early, and then teams make adjustments as they go on. And if I'm having to put my prediction somewhere, I'm putting it with Fernando Mendoza. I'm putting it with Curt Cignetti. I'm putting it on the team that has a chance to be the first ever 16-0 squad in college football history. That's the team that I am taking. And our friends at FanDuel have this about 8.5, depending on when you look at the spread. That's gone up since it opened, but it's held pretty steady right there. I think Indiana wins. I think they cover. I like 31-17, Alex. That's where I'm at. I think it's slow and ugly early. Teams start to score and figure it out punch after punch down the stretch. I do believe, though, that Indiana is able to handle this game, control the line of scrimmage the best that they can, control the time of possession as well, and hit a couple of big shots as well. There needs to be a turnover somewhere, and I think Indiana's able to do that. I like 31-17 Indiana. About halfway through the fourth quarter, I think we know how the outcome is going to look, and I think Indiana brings their first ever national championship to Bloomington.
As someone who covers and backs Miami, I've grown accustomed to breathing into a paper bag during the fourth quarter of games. And I think I'm going to have my old-fashioned brown bag, lunch bag with me for this one. I think it's going to be very, very close down to the wire. And obviously for Miami to get this done, they cannot be as sloppy as they were against Ole Miss. 10 penalties is not going to fly. Losing the turnover margin is not going to fly. I believe Miami has to be net zero or in the plus in the takeaway column in order to win this game. I think this game can be won or lost by both teams on first down. I think Miami, can they get 5 yards on first down somewhat consistently with Mark Fletcher Jr.? That's going to go a long way to deciding this one. We already talked about the pass rush. Miami needs to make Fernando Mendoza uncomfortable to win this game. If you let him sit back and take those 3 seconds to throw, he's going to destroy you with those back shoulder signature passes of his. And I think Carson Beck needs to really excel with his mental preparation for this one and reading zone coverage. And of course, IU has hauled in 18 interceptions in 15 games this year. So he's got to avoid that interception bug. But ultimately, I think it can come down to if Miami doesn't commit self-inflicted wounds, because I know Indiana won't. Indiana will not beat themselves. Will Miami is the question. I think Miami is capable of bringing it down to physics, big people moving smaller people, and that's why I'm going to back Miami by a final score of 23-20. I think it's going to be really close. I think it's going to go over or under, I should say. I think it's at 47.5. So I think we go under. I think Miami covers that spread and wins outright. And, no matter what happens, we're going to get some form of celebration. We're either going to see the streets of the 305 go crazy, or Bloomington's going to be partying over their first national championship in football. And I think it's going to be incredible. And I appreciate all the everydayers on Locked On Hoosiers and Locked On Canes. Jacob Goins has an awesome show, does a great job on Locked On Hoosiers.
Thank you.
We love holding it down for the South Florida folks here on Locked On Canes. And we'll talk to everybody next time after the national championship game right here on Locked On Canes and Locked On Hoosiers on the #1 Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.